What's up guys, and welcome back to Tech Plan. Today we're going to be doing single node propagation of Monstera Deliciosa. Let's check it out. Alright, so this is our Monstera Deliciosa, in which we are going to chop up into single node cuttings. We are going to propagate these in multiple different mediums just to see if one performs better. Another interesting aspect about this whole experiment is this is already a half dead Monstera. I left this one outside in the cold a few nights too many, and so a lot of the leaves froze and died, but this will be a cool instance to show you that you should never give up on a plant that you think is toast or dead, because they usually got some life deep down in, and all you gotta do is bring it out. So that'll be another cool aspect to this experiment. Alright, so to start this video off, I am going to try and cut off the largest piece I can, and really I'm just cutting at the vine at the very base of the soil so we can start processing our large cutting into single node cuttings. The node is usually right where the leaf is sticking out, so as long as you go somewhere in between there, you shouldn't cut the actual growth point and you should be fine. You can see it's pretty wrinkly too because it's rather dehydrated. Like I said, this plant is in really poor condition, but I'm going to show you that it doesn't really matter and we're going to bring the life out of it. So it's going to be awesome. I'm also going to chop a lot of these aerial roots off the vine. They're mostly like dead or dried out, and so all they really are is organic matter that can rot and just introduce mold and other things into our propagation. Now that we have a big chunk of vine, I'm going to process it a little more by ripping off any of the old half-dead leaves, and I'm actually going to rip off most of the even half-alive leaves except for the very growth tip, because we're just going to propagate that the normal way because there's no point in throwing it out or ripping the leaves off. So we'll leave just the top two leaves, and the rest we're going to peel off. And like I did a little earlier, I'm going to cut more of those aerial roots off because all they are is dried, dead, and again, any dead stuff is what's going to mold in your propagation bins or in any propagation method. The living stuff usually doesn't. Now that we have all the leaves peeled off in a way, and this is a much more mature plant and it's a big vine, you can really see the growth points or the nodes on this vine. So I'm going to show you a bunch of them. These are what you do not want to cut through, so you want to make sure you miss these, because each one of these little like navel looking spots, or like, I don't really know how to describe this, but each one of these little spots is where the new growth is going to come out of your single node propagations. So whatever you do, do not cut through that. It might still work. I've kind of done some experiments and they can sort of recover, but if you want the most success, avoid cutting through them. When you do choose where you're going to cut, try and find the mid spot between two nodes just to give it the most material. I've got some experiments I've done in the past, which you can watch, where the longer the node length was, like on either side, the faster and better they actually did. So it does actually matter a little bit. I choose to use really sharp razor blades. I know there's a lot of people that say it's dangerous, and it is. They are very sharp. However, those make the cleanest cuts, and you'll see in a little bit later in this video why it's so awesome and why those cuts are so fantastic. This plant is actually a propagation from a video I made about 2 years ago about propagating Monstera Deliciosa. So you'll be able to see what the original node looks like and what it's done over almost 2 years of being in the soil. Alright, and once you've done that, if the internodal space is a little too small, then you can do like a double node cutting. It's not that big of a deal. But try and get as many single nodes that you can, and if the spacing is too tight between nodes, then just make it a double or a triple cutting. It's not a big deal. Alright, we are up to the amazing part I talked about earlier that I wanted to show you. Again, this is a 2-year-old cutting that I propagated and rooted, and look at the chunk that was in the ground. This was the original stump, or whatever you want to call it, and you can see how it's really like woodified, and you can see my perfect precise cut. I used the razor blade last time when I did this, and you can just see how perfect that cutting is even after 2 whole years have passed and it's been sitting in the dirt. A lot of people always ask if I let things callus over, and I never do. So I didn't let this callus over. I just chucked it right into its this one was either water or sphagnum moss or perlite. I don't remember exactly which one this was, but they all turned out the same. That's why I love these razor blades so much. Even though they are dangerous, the cuts are so clean that they last like literally 2 years and still look almost as if they were fresh cut. It's like literally fossilized. They're like woodified. I really love it. Alright, now that we're past that, let's talk about the mediums we're going to try and attempt to do these single node propagations in. So I have one bin with 3 different materials. One is just sphagnum moss, one is going to be perlite, and the other is going to be leca. So we'll see which one performs better, if we can even determine that they do, or if they just don't work at all. So I'm just going to bury each one in there a little, like almost halfway in, so they're covered a little bit but not completely submerged. You might be able to put them way deeper if you want to try it, but this is just what I did. And then I'm going to lay the bigger ones just across 2 mediums, just because I don't really know where to put them at this point, because we've already put enough cuttings in each medium. So that's just what I'm going to do. And then we also are just going to take that top cutting and throw it in some water. It always works for me. It should work for you. There's some footage on my Instagram account of how long it was in a jar, almost like 3 or 4 months, and it was doing great. But anyways, this is how we're starting the experiment. Alright, so I put these under grow lights and let them sit for about a month. I figured it would be much slower because this Monstera was not healthy from the get-go. So let's check them out and see where they're at. Starting with the leca, it doesn't seem like much is really happening here. I don't see any new growth, but I also don't see anything dying. It is producing a little bit of like sap syrup on the end, but for the most part, not a big deal. Switching over to the perlite, we can actually see there's some growth on this one, and surprisingly, it's already rooted. This one must have had a lot more energy than the other ones, because I was really surprised to see how well it's doing. The other one, however, looks just like the previous leca ones. Really not much action. It's just kind of chilling out and doing its thing. And then looking at the middle, really wooden one, the one that's the original cut, that one is starting to get a little growth on the one end. Usually when you have these multiple node ones, only one growth point usually activates, and so it's pretty typical as to what it's doing, and it seems to be on the more fresher side and the less woody side. Lastly, looking at the Sphagnum Moss, we are seeing a little growth point action. You can see that the growth point or the node portion is like expanding a little bit as the growth is pushing through and starting its process. No roots yet, but they're both starting to grow. So overall, they're all doing just fine and well. I put them back under grow lights and let another 20 days pass, and let's check out how they're doing. Overall, from the wide shot, they are looking good and there is progress. Starting with the Sphagnum Moss, we can see the first one, the little node growth point is getting a little bigger. Hasn't really done too much, but it is expanding and growing. The second one is looking pretty darn good. We almost have a half an inch of growth. So overall, the Sphagnum Moss is working and they are growing. Moving on to the Perlite one, you can see that this one probably has the largest growth. It's almost 2 inches, and this node also has a root. You can see a little bit of it is rotting, but again, I don't really care about that. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't scare me. If you guys have propagations going and you see something like this, don't freak out too much. That tip probably just happened to be sitting in more of the water at the bottom of the bin, but you could already see where the rotted part is off. It's split into 2 new roots. So nothing to worry about, and this one is doing fine. Looking at the center, like woody one, the growth is pretty good, and there's actually roots coming out of multiple spots. It looks like the roots have grabbed onto the Sphagnum Moss, the leca, and the perlite, so it seems to like it all. The last one in the perlite isn't really doing much. I mean, the growth point's growing a little bit, but it's similar to the other one in the Sphagnum Moss. Nothing special, but we'll give it some time. Looking at the leca though, those ones are a little slower. They don't seem to be doing as much. I almost wonder if it's a little drier, and because the medium's larger, it's not making a great contact with the medium, and that's why they're not doing anything, or we just got unlucky and 2 slower ones happened to be placed in the leca. I did notice there was some mold growing on where I cut the roots, and this is a pretty good reason why I cut as much as I can off, because like I said, that dead organic matter always molds. However, I'm not worried about this at all. A lot of people start to freak out, but you don't have to freak out. The healthy part of the plant will be just fine, and the mold is just going to eat the dead stuff. However, the mold is pretty darn cool up close. It looks like a little mountain with tiny little bushes on it. It's kind of cool. I like looking at things up close, and I hope you guys do too. Skipping ahead about another 10-ish days, we are at almost exactly 2 months since the start of this experiment. Let's take a look and see how they're doing. From the wide shot, it looks like the Sphagnum Moss and Perlite are doing fantastic, and there is a lot more new growth. But let's check it out a little closer. Looking at the leca, they have done not much. It's been about 2 months and not any activation really. Again, we could just be unlucky and we pick 2 older ones on accident that don't have the energy they need, or leca just isn't a great medium to try and propagate in a bin, if that makes any sense. Most of my previous bins have had like a lot of stuff on top of that, and they work together well together, but not by themselves. Looking at the Perlite one, the first one I pulled out really didn't have any growth either, so this one's a little slow just like the leca ones. But looking at the other one, it's actually doing pretty fantastic. There's some good root growth, and you can see where the roots split off from previous times when you saw that little rotting tip. So it did just fine, it recovered, and it was nothing to worry about. The growth is already doing really well too, with a whole leaf starting to form and pop out. Looking at the Sphagnum Moss, this one also had a slow grower. I mean, the growth point is moving, but we haven't seen roots yet, and it's not growing as quick as some of the other ones. However, one of them has done a little better, with the nub getting a little longer, but still nothing special. It's not until we look at the big woody one that we really see a lot of action. I don't know if it's because it's got 3 nodes and a lot of energy, but this one is pumping out roots like crazy in all the different substrates. So this one is doing fantastic, which I'm most surprised by because this is the oldest part of the plant. So I'm surprised at how much energy is still left in this really woody stuff, but it seems to be doing really good. I'm going to graduate the ones that are doing really well into a new bigger bin, and then for the rest of this experiment, I'm just going to mix the substrate up, which is usually how my propagation bins look, and we're going to give all these slow growers another chance. So I'm going to bury them all in there a little deeper just to give them a little bit more moisture so they're not dehydrating as quick, and it gives them a little bit of a better opportunity to get going. At this point, I can't say the mediums have really performed any better. We've seen growth in all of them except for the leca. I don't know if it's a fault of the leca, but I think it could be partially just the way it is. It's much chunkier, so it doesn't surround things nicely, but the Perlite and Sphagnum Moss definitely did well. However, I'm going to graduate the bigger plants into a different propagation bin, and I'm going to mix all the substrates together so it emulates what most of my propagation bins look like, and we're going to put the slow growers back in there and give them a chance. Alright, we are 5 months from the initial cut day, and here we are. You can already see from the wide shot that we do have leaves growing. However, it isn't a total of 5, which is how many nodes we had in here. I'm going to get all of them out, and then we will inspect them and see how they're doing. Just as you saw in the wide shot, we do have 3 really successful nodes. They all have leaves on them. I mean, these were a little slower than the previous ones, which you will see soon, but these ones did pretty darn well. I mean, they all survived so far. They have leaves, they're not rotting away, and it's been 5 months in a bin, so they're doing great. They have root balls and they have growth. Now, what happened to the other 2? Well, they really just didn't grow that much. They're all still alive, they haven't rotted, and they have rooted and grown some growth, but they are substantially behind everything else for the 5 months they've been in that bin. But that's alright, we'll pot them up anyways. For this video, I'm just going to put them all in the same pot to save space, and it'll give you a bushier plant in the future. The soil mix is mostly peat moss and perlite with a little bit of regular dirt and just whatever I've recycled from other plants. I kind of dump it all in a bin and just reuse it, and it seems to be just fine. So we're just going to pot all 5 of these nodes up and then give them some more time and see how they do. Alright, here we are. It has been almost 9 months since we took cuttings from our original Monstera, and here are the ones that we potted up. If you look at the pot, you can already see that there are 4 solid growths coming out of this pot, but if you look very carefully, you can even see that 5th slow node. So this is just proof that you should never give up on your plants because they usually pull through. It took 8 months for that one node to put that little spike out, but if we keep giving it more time, it'll get big just like its brothers and sisters. Overall, the whole plant looks pretty good. All the leaves look healthy and it's doing pretty well. Again, this was already a propagation that we took cuttings from that I left out in the cold. It was all shriveled, half dead, but they still pulled through and they turned out into a nice, beautiful, bushy plant. Now, if you've still been watching this whole time, I've got a treat for you because we got a few other interesting things to look at. There were the ones that I graduated to a bigger bin a long time ago, and guess what? They're still in that bin, so let's check them out. I'm pretty sure these cuttings have been in this bin for about 5 months, maybe if my math is correct, 4 or 5 months, either way, a very long time. I tried to pull the one out, but it was really rooted in there and I didn't want to damage it too much, so I'm just going to kind of loosen up a bit so I can show it to you. But this one is the woody one, and this is the one I'm the most excited about. For the most part in the bin, they've been stunted a little bit, but I think the leaves are bigger than the other ones I showed you that are potted up. I bet you if I actually got this into a pot, they'd be a lot bigger by now, but I kind of stunted them in this bin. However, take a look at the woody cutting. It is still doing great and it has not rotted yet. It has been in a really damp, wet bin with all kinds of stuff growing in it, and it's doing just fine. And at this point, it's almost 3 years old. I mean, that's crazy. That woody piece was a cutting I made 3 years ago, and it's still going strong. The overall plant, too, is doing great for the abuse I've put it through. It has been in a very small bin and cramped, and it's still doing well. It's green, it's alive, it's rooting, and it's growing lots of leaves. I really love that my channel is getting really old now because I get to see these things that have been around for years and to see how they're doing. And again, this woody cutting is just amazing to me. It might not be exciting to you, but I love that the cutting just looks so fantastic since day one. And another really cool bonus clip you can see in this video is this Jade Cutting. Yeah, you heard me. This is a Jade Cutting that's been in a propagation bin for I think like 3 or 4 months, which is absolutely wild. It's got roots up and down the entire length of the cutting where it's been in contact with the wet moss, and there's only a slight bit of rotting at the very end where I cut it, with tons of new growth and lots of roots on the other end. I'm absolutely shocked that this Jade Cutting is doing great in this really wet bin. Most people wouldn't think a succulent can do well in something like this, in this like literal like jungle, wet, moist environment, but it's doing fantastic. And again, this really shows that you shouldn't give up on plants and you should always try different methods and see what happens, because there's a lot of tried and true knowledge out there that might not actually be the case. Alright, for those of you that are still here during this long video, one more bonus clip. So this was also an interesting thing. When I put these Monstera in this bin, you can see how they outgrew it really fast. And one time I snapped the growth point off of one of them. I think it might be the woody one, and that's why where it's growing, it's kind of gangly looking and weird. But look at this. This growth point was just barely even a node at that point, and I just left it in there because, again, sometimes laziness ends up being my friend. But I just threw it back in the bin because I'm like, whatever, it'll just compost and be nutrients for the plants. But it rooted. I mean, that tiny little bit of node that was left, that growth point, actually survived in this environment, and now I have another Monstera cutting. I just think it's wild that that little piece was able to root so much and live. Well guys, that pretty much sums up this video. I hope you enjoyed it and all the progress it showed, and it should give you the courage to maybe try this at home. Seeing that one 2-year-old cutting in the soil was really cool for me, and I hope you guys thought it was pretty neat too. The cutting still looked really good on the cut end, and I think that is because I use really sharp utensils. They are a little more dangerous, so be careful, but I think your cuttings benefit from them overall. As always guys, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.